Hello and welcome to the History of Bangalore. I'm Ramjee Chandran and this is episode 70 of season 2. In the last episode, we left Kempe Gowda at a point when everything was ready. The permissions had been secured, the territory had been secured, and the plans were all in place. Achutharaya had brought peace to the plateau and trade was humming again. Now the market town that Kempe Gowda envisaged was more practical than ever, and all his preparations were soon to bear fruit, and he could turn to the act that mattered the most, laying the foundations of the Pete itself. Today, we are going to join him as he builds the Bangalore Pete. But first, please join me as I take pause to thank my sponsors, the Prestige Group, who make this podcast possible. Building cities, one landmark at a time, they transform dreams into reality. You can be a part of the future. Simply add prestige to your life. And now we step into the year 1537 and into the opening hours of the day when the Pete began. The early morning light would have been soft, the air carrying a faint chill, the ridge cleared, the undergrowth cut, burnt, the ground leveled, leaving a broad exposed surface. And in the middle of this clearing were 4 bulls, yoked to decorated plows, its cowherds waiting for a signal. It doesn't take much to imagine the scene. It must have been back then, 5 centuries ago, as it would be today. Kempe Gowda's officers would have stood together, some accompanied by their families, a few men from Yalahanka who had followed their chieftain here, people from Hale Bengaluru near Kodigehalli, which was the hometown of Kempe Gowda's wife, the Gavundas from the village inside Kempe Gowda's territory, and imperial envoys sent from Vijayanagara to observe the proceedings and report back to Achutharaya. Priests preparing for the puja, and a handful of young men ready to do whatever the morning demanded, the heavy lifting, carrying tools, holding ropes, managing bullocks, running messages across the field, whatever young men are good for. Records indicate that Kempe Gowda had picked this particular day in consultation with his astrologers who were looking for an auspicious day. Logically, these would have included imperial astrologers. They would have had some say in the matter, considering that the ultimate beneficiary of the Pete would have been the Vijayanagara treasury. But what day exactly this was is lost to us. It certainly would have been recorded somewhere in some medium. Whatever that record, it has not been found. Considering how much of history of the Deccan, even for centuries preceding, has been pegged to precise details, it is disappointing that we can't even tell when the groundbreaking ceremony for the Bangalore Pete happened. But still, we can conclude when that day was not. Logically, it wouldn't have been during the month of Ashada, during which no one starts anything new or buys anything new. Now, by the Panchanga, or the almanac, in 1537, Ashada would have been between mid-June and mid-July, towards the 3rd weeks of each month. And then there is the matter of the Chaturmasya, a 4-month period during which the most significant belief is that Vishnu enters into a cosmic slumber, also called Yoga Nidra, for these 4 months. Because the divine energy of the universe is considered at rest, this time is designated for human beings to start focusing inwards. So according to strict Hindu astrological traditions, the entire 4 months Chaturmasya is considered inauspicious for major worldly ceremonies that might require divine blessings for new beginnings, but not possible because Vishnu was resting. These could be weddings, housewarming ceremonies, starting a new business venture, the groundbreaking for a new Pete, other significant life cycle rites that are generally postponed after this period would be towards the close of the Gregorian calendar year. So if Kempe Gowda observed the Chaturmasya strictly and spent 4 months in quiet contemplation, we can narrow down the event at the Pete to between January and May. Now there are practical reasons as well. The Varsha Ritu, the rainy season, includes the month of Ashada. During this time, especially around July and particularly when the Bengaluru landscape was still largely open country, it would have been characterized by very violent and heavy winds. Large-scale, long-term construction projects like building a mud fort would conventionally avoid this period of extreme weather. Well, whatever the month was, the hour was certainly early in the morning by the traditions of South Indian Hindu ceremonial life, which has long favored dawn for beginnings. Brahmins perform their ablutions at sunrise, and most rituals follow that rhythm. This influenced non-Hindu rulers as well. Interestingly, Colonel Wilkes, writing many years later, noted that Hyder Ali followed the Brahminical traditions of early morning bathing as a part of his morning ablutions. As the sun rose, the priests stepped forward, conducting the puja right at the center of this cleared expanse. Offerings would have been made, directions marked, the site sanctified. The lines would have already been drawn across the ridge in the days before, the boundaries agreed upon, the paths of the plows set out, and the geometry of the pete decided in advance. Everything that could have been prepared before the ritual would have been prepared. All that remained was to cut the earth. The cowherds stood with the bullocks, harnessed in plows, right there in what we might call the Doddapete square. They were ready to move away from each other in the four cardinal directions, north, south, east, and west. It would have been the priests who gave the signal to move. One can imagine the excitement in the air as the cowherds, caught up in the momentousness of the occasion, would have quite certainly loudly exhorted the bullocks to start moving in a straight line, their voices fading as they moved forward. And as those bulls or bullocks, whatever they were, moved forward, ploughing a furrow through the earth, those mortar scratches would have become Bengaluru's first streets. Back then, they were called Doddapete and Chikkapete. Now, in the early days, streets were not named after people like we do today, and they were more descriptive of the areas that they served. Now, similar examples exist around the world. For example, in London, a street address in, say, Cheapside would simply be 59 Cheapside, not Cheapside Road. The rest of the area being within earshot of the bells. Londoners would know what I meant by that. The same would be true for areas like Piccadilly or Le Marais in Paris or the Bowery in New York. Soon enough, streets started to get named, not only for the neighborhood they served, but sometimes in directions, like we have Mysore Road in Bangalore. They acquired suffixes such as Vidi or Bidi and later became placeholders to honor people or major historical events. But right then, the two streets were Doddapete and Chikkapete, indicating that's what they housed. Doddapete meant big market and Chikkapete means small market. Now, Doddapete is designed for heavy goods movement and therefore housed the wholesale trade, warehouses, large storefronts, while Chikkapete housed the retail trade. For this reason, the north-south Doddapete furrow was the wider of the two. Once the ritual ended, workers widened this line, clearing stones, compacting the soil until it became a broad, straight avenue. Doddapete would become the great street of the new town, the main drag. It stretched from the northern approach that led towards Yelahanka to the southern approach that was leading towards Anekal. Even at this early stage, it was envisioned as a thoroughfare wide enough to be able to carry carts and cattle and the daily movement of heavy trade. The east-west furrow would become Chikkapete, the smaller market street. Each of these streets would have been 1 kilometer long when finished, so the bulls would have moved about half a kilometer each from the center. Now, where the two streets crossed, the ground widened naturally, creating the open space that would become the Pete's central square, and that was the first recognizable heart of Bengaluru. And it was from these two lines on the ground that the rest of Bengaluru began. And now for a commercial break, and let's dive into every detail about the Pete and the logic of it, which continues to this day. Right after this.
Maximum connectivity, maximum luxury, maximum lifestyle. Live your max at Prestige Raintree Park. Opulent residences nestled in 21 acres of breathtaking landscape with 1 lakh plus square feet of clubhouse, 3 swimming pools, and ample leisure and sports amenities. Experience exquisite living at Prestige Raintree Park in prime Whitefield with schools, offices, hospitals, and shopping malls just a hop away. Call 81399 or visit prestigeconstructions.com to know more. Radar approved.
Welcome back to the Pete. The marking of the first two streets the narrower one, Chickpete, for retail trade, and the broader one, or Doddapete, for heavy-duty wholesale access, was the beginning of Kempegowda's master plan. He had mapped the whole area for easy access and exit. One significant feature were the 8 gates of the Pete. Now, you know from my previous episodes how Kempegowda had the foresight to acquire areas contiguous to the Pete, such as Alsur, Hesarghatta and Domlur, to create easy, predictable and safe access for traders to move through his territory. He also thought that creating these gates would provide access and exit into the major trade routes. Some of these gates today are police stations, quite appropriately. But let's look at all of them. Now, I must point out that these gates are historically identified with the fort, but I mention them now as they are practically more in step with the trade itself. Right at the northern end of Doddapete was Yelahanka Gate, and today this is where the Mysore Bank building stands. This gate handled all the traffic that came down from Yelahanka and the older settlements of the northern plateau. Also to the north was Yashwantpur Gate, which was slightly more towards the west, an entrance that was associated with the old line of movement towards the settlements in that direction. Now, its approximate modern equivalent lies near the Upparpet police station. Right on the eastern end of Chickpet was the Alsur Gate, and today this is Hudson Circle. It opened into the general Alsur area and the network of villages around the tank there. Its approximate location is today marked by the Halsuru Gate police station. The western end of Chickpete was serviced by 2 gates, Sondayakopa Gate and Kengeri Gate. Sondayakopa served the routes to Magadi and places beyond, and it was somewhere near the railway overbridge. Kengeri Gate opened towards the road that led to the towns and fields, the agricultural areas of the western plateau, and towards Kengeri itself, which was a coconut grove. Kengeri is derived from the words for coconut orchard. The southern stretch of the Pete provided access to all the busy trade routes towards the Kongu region, merging with the larger trans-peninsular trade routes. This would have been the most significant and heavy trade routes. So this had more than one entrance again. The Anekal Gate, operating the southern end of Doddapete, and in its place today is the Kalasipalaya police station. Further along the southern boundary stood the Kankanahalli Gate, and this is today near where the Vokaligara Sangha entrance is now located. A little to the northwest was a gate that has been mentioned in older texts as one of the principal entrances, but really no one has any idea where it is presently. And connected to that, within the fort complex itself, there was a principal southern entrance, sometimes simply referred to as the Fort Gate, positioned where the main line of Doddapete would have met the southern edge of the entire Pete enclosure. And this marked the point where what we might call the spine of the Pete, Doddapete, entered the area such that Doddapete ran from Yelahanka Gate to the Fort Gate in the south. And on the east-west axis, Chickpete ran, as I said before, from Alsur Gate to Sondayakopa Gate. Now this brings me to the core structure of the Pete, which is quite interesting. The north-south axis of the Doddapete divided the Pete into 2 broad divisions of the town. The Deshadapete on the west, which held all the trades that needed larger spaces for storage, and the Nagaratpete on the east. The Pete layout was structured to reflect its economic and social organization, with areas divided according to trades and crafts, and by inference, caste, although there are many interesting side theories on this. Where Doddapete and Chickpete intersected was the point where this story started. It was from this square that the Pete had spread outward into long rectangular blocks, each occupied by a trade. Now, the broader spatial distribution ensured that each trade, or as some people put it, each caste, lived and operated in a specific locality, which was then often named after the commodity traded or the occupation practiced right there. So those of a trade generally flocked together, resulting in many shops carrying the same goods operating side by side. Specific localities or named markets included the broader Chickpete area, which housed gold and silversmiths, the Aki and Ragipete, for example, for rice and ragi merchants, Kumbarapete for potters, Taragupete where grain loading and unloading took place, Aralepete was for the cotton trade, Balepete for the bangle sellers, and so on. The streets of Chikkapete were narrow and shaded and built for short-distance movement, while Doddapete carried the heavier traffic of carts and pack animals. Along the main streets, shopfronts were simple, tiled-roofed rooms with raised floors open to the road in the daytime and shuttered with a wicker screen at night. The town followed this pattern in every direction. 2 clean axes, a central square, and a ring of trades arranged in blocks that made the pete easy to navigate and easy to use. Behind this visible layout, the first sheds and workshops began to rise. The architecture was simple: timber posts, wattle and daub walls as they call it, mud floors, street-facing workspaces. Now these were not yet the buildings that would define the pete in the decades to come, but they marked the beginning of Bengaluru's urban form. The logic itself was quite clear. Immediately, right inside the gates, right off the highways, were the areas that needed access to movement the most. Smithies, who repaired metal fittings for carts and tools. The oil pressers, whose produce traveled more frequently than the others. Their placement near the gate reduced heavy movement inside the town. Now, into the commercial axis of the pete, Deshadapete, held trades that needed the larger spaces for storage, such as Akipete, the rice market, where the carts bringing the grain had to unload closer to the main thoroughfare than the others. Ragipete, similarly, where the grain, but it had a shorter storage life, was kept in smaller warehouses to allow quicker movement from cart to store. The gold merchants, on the other hand, were located right in the heart and the center of the pete, where security could be the most and the dust of the heavy goods was the least. Cotton, for example, was given large shaded spaces and access to looms and dyeing areas, so this block or these blocks were laid out where both sunlight and airflow were the most. Further south, the blocks became narrower and more specialized. Tiglarapete, for instance, and these belonged to that community that were the horticulturalists, lay on the southwestern side, and these were close to the routes that brought all the vegetables and flowers into the pete from the tank-fed gardens around what we know as Basanagudi and Sankanahalli. As a contrast, basket and bamboo workers had the narrowest streets because they needed small workshops and steady foot traffic for their light goods. I could go on with an entire list of them, but these are examples enough to show how well the pete was organized to make most sense to each trade and to their needs for access, accommodation, and storage, taking into account things like sunlight, security, dust, and the space that those goods needed both for storage and for movement. Taken all together, we see that the pete followed a direct logic: heavy goods near the gates, perishable items near the gardens and water, crafts that require heating or firing near the edges, tightly stored commodities near the center, and trades needing visibility placed closer to the main crossing. Every block lay where it could serve its purpose with the least friction, the greatest predictability, and the most professionalism. By the early 1540s, the layout that Kempe Gowda intended, the axial streets, the occupational blocks, the defined perimeter, the known points of entry, the tanks, the shrines, all of them exist on the ground. Sadly, the records available do not tell us how many builders worked on it, how long all of this took to complete, or how long it took to fill all the internal quarters. What it does allow is this one statement which we can tell from modern times: the town came together exactly as planned. The lines drawn with plows and ropes had become the physical framework of the pete, and all the elements recorded in our earliest written sources, the streets, the blocks, the gates, the tanks, the shrines, were already a part of the settlement's lived geography. Now, this grid-like layout of a new city was not unique. Grid-like cities existed for thousands of years before. The Indus Valley was a grid-like place, right through to the urban architecture of the Romans. But Kempe Gowda's meticulous application of logic and care accorded each trade with its needs, and that is what attracted merchants immediately to the new city of Bengaluru. They do say that success is never an accident. In the next episode, Life in the Pete. Was the division of blocks a separation of caste? Was it something more practical? I will look at the administrative logic that Kempe Gowda had put in place, and of course, a look at the most significant part of the Pete in history, the Bengaluru fort. That is coming up very soon. Stay glued. I am Ramjee Chandran, and this is the History of Bangalore.